In this section, we're going to learn how to use adaptive cards in a custom task module in a Microsoft Teams app. We're also going to learn how to invoke task modules from anywhere within Microsoft Teams using deep links. We're going to specifically cover an adaptive cards overview, how to design adaptive cards, invoking task modules using adaptive cards, and invoking task modules with deep links. A card is a user interface container for short or related pieces of information. Cards can have multiple properties and attachments and include buttons that trigger card actions. Adaptive cards are a cross-product specification for various Microsoft products, including Bots, Outlook, Teams, and Windows. And they're the recommended card type for new Microsoft Teams apps. Microsoft Teams supports multiple types of cards. Let's look at how we can develop adaptive cards for Microsoft Teams task modules. An adaptive card is represented as a JSON object. The JSON string defines all the controls, texts, actions, and the hosting application will use to render the card. The JSON can be authored in any text editor. The Microsoft Teams app, App Studio, can be used to author adaptive cards, starting with a template and preview the rendering of the card. The following JSON on this slide represents an adaptive card that contains an input box and a single submit button. You can see here that how it's rendered on the right-hand side in the task module that pops up. And you can see here how you can design your adaptive card using App Studio from the card editor. Here you can define the JSON, and then you can see a live preview for what it would look like here on the right. Now, previously in this module, you learned how to use HTML and JavaScript or React to implement a task module. And you also can use adaptive cards to implement the task module interface. Using adaptive cards and task modules follows almost all the same rules as an HTML-based task module. You're still going to be working with the task module info object. The only real difference is how you create the task module. So if you recall, the task module is invoked by passing a populated instance of the task info object into the start task method. For an HTML-based task module, you set the address of the web page loaded in the task module in the taskinfo.url property. When using an adaptive card, you assign the JSON of the card to the taskinfo.card property. The other difference with adaptive cards is in the parameter of the callback method defined when invoking the task module with the start task method. The values of all input controls defined in the adaptive card are returned in a single object, the result object, within the callback method. Now let's look at how we can invoke task modules using deep links. Task modules can be invoked using buttons and other types of user actions within Microsoft Teams, and another way to invoke a task module is with a deep link. Deep links are URLs that contain specific values that Microsoft Teams uses to invoke the task module. The format for a deep link is shown here on the slide, where it's teams.microsoft.com/l/task with the app ID, and then after that, there's a query string value that contains a bunch of information about your task module. Let's look at each of these different values. The app ID is the ID of the custom Microsoft Teams app. The app ID, which is a GUID, can be found in the app's manifest.json file. The task info.whatever the property is, like URL, height, width, and title, these additional properties on the query string of the URL map to the specific properties in the task info object that I covered previously in these videos. The deep link can be used from anywhere in your application, including in conversations with Microsoft Teams channels, or even in an external application, such as in an email that someone receives as a notification.